Welcome to the Impulse Spotlight, a podcast for product development professionals. In this episode, we meet with the head of innovations and advanced concepts at Keurig Dr. Pepper, whose path into industrial design was unlike the typical story and has given him the opportunity to work with companies such as Steelcase, Swingline, Disney, and Marvel. With a diverse background spanning industries from coin-operated video games to household appliances, he's honed his ability to understand and respond to the evolving needs of consumers. In his free time, he enjoys flexing his artistic muscles, sketching out architectural designs, and relaxing with his family and friends. Chris Cunningham was born in Chicago, Illinois, and his career has been a dynamic exploration of how design can enhance people's lives. From crafting immersive cooking experiences to designing ergonomic office products, Chris's focus has consistently been on creating products that resonate deeply with users. He believes great design is not merely aesthetic, it's a powerful tool for problem solving and storytelling. In today's episode, we discuss the Fusion lamination platform, an innovative lamination product that Chris spearheaded the design of from the ground up. Chris shares his expertise on upfront design and how he was able to use those early lessons learned to plan out packaging and market space while final designs were being completed. He also provides personal anecdotes on the trade-offs within design, the decision-making process, and the realities of idea creation. Join us as we gain a new insight into the industrial design side of product development and better understand the relationships between teams that work in tandem to bring a product to market. Let's get into it. Hey, Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Troy, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So I tell everybody at the start of the show, I worked for a company out of school that had all facets of product development under one roof: industrial design, engineering, prototyping. This is back when SLA machines were state of the art, and like millions of dollars kind of thing. I tell everybody I got my master's degree in product development working there before I started Impulse.
Cool.
How did you get into product development?
Very roundaboutly. Started out, had loved architecture, loved designing, creating things. Always loved solving problems for people. Followed that path through community college into university, and then just wasn't my tribe, wasn't my vibe. I did some production engineering work because I, like that kind of stuff during school, and I was kind of working my way through school that way. So, liked the engineering aspects, a little woefully inept at math. I ended up finding industrial design and just fell in love and dove in head first, and been solving problems for consumers ever since.
Very cool. It's interesting. It is a very roundabout way of getting into product development.
Yeah.
What's your current role and what kinds of products do you develop?
So currently I work for Keurig Dr. Pepper. I work for the appliance business for Keurig, which is great. I work in advanced concepts. So a lot of the work that I do is setting vision for the organization of where we're going to go in the next 3, 5, 7 years. So it's a lot of future casting, a lot of taking the hardcore product development skills that I've learned over the last 30 years of my career and saying, okay, if we want to get to this solution to address the consumer's need, we need to do these sorts of programs, these types of sprints, and it's good. It helps to be in a company that has a real big belief in innovation. And it also helps to, be in a company that we're not just looking to make money on selling the appliances. We have that, razor blade or coffee maker, coffee consumable model.
Right.
So that's nice.
Yeah, interesting. So tell us about the product that you want to talk about today and why you chose that one in particular.
Yeah. So, when we talked, I think the other day, that there's a lamination range that I did when I was working for ACO Brands, and it was a really kind of interesting, fun project from a development standpoint. It's kind of a soup to nuts evaluation of where we were from a laminating business standpoint, so understanding how we're making business in lamination. I don't think anybody laminates anymore, which is kind of an interesting product to pick. unless people are making fake IDs. But back in the day, that's what these were used for. But we had a ton of different SKU proliferation. We had a lot of different with those SKUs. We had a lot of different mechanisms to drive them. We had a lot of different platforms. So the interesting thing with that program was how do we number one address what the consumers want by giving the right feature sets for the right price. So and then giving the flexibility to the retailers to have their own SKUs, and then making it good for us to say like, look, now we currently have 25, 30 different laminators. How do we really trim this down to a core group of 10 to 15 laminators to basically service the globe? um, the globes need from a lamination standpoint. So
Yes.
whether it was Asia, Europe, the U.S., South America, we just wanted to make sure that we had a range that would kind of deliver for everybody.
Yeah, interesting. So, did I understand right? Because you developed a separate SKU for each retailer, that's why you got many, and then you ended
Yeah,
up this one you had to you brought it down to fewer.
yeah. So it's an interesting thing, right? How that happens. Like you have super eager salespeople, which are there to help drive the business. They're there to help sell product. Sometimes they'll get a request from like in this instance like a WB Mason. Saying like, hey, could you give me like this laminator is great, but could we do this extra feature? So instead of doing like 3 mil, 5 mil, could it only do 5 millimeter? It's like, okay, sure. So we would, create that because, we wanted to get the business. At the time that was happening, the business was growing leaps and bounds. We weren't worried about inventory. We weren't worried about complexity in supply chain. We were just worried about, making sure we we're keeping our retailers happy and, moving the needle from a growth standpoint. So that's like how it would happen. Like somebody would come off and um, Troy and Bob's office stationery store, be like, hey, can we get our own laminator? And our salespeople are like, of course you can get that. Like we've got a great design team, great engineering team. We can make you whatever we want, and we would do that. So as things got I guess as times got a little bit tougher, this happened in like the early tens or the early teens. So we're working on this in 12, 13. We'd just gone through the recession of '08. We were trying to make sure that we were being smart about how we manage our business and a little bit more thorough and thoughtful as opposed to opportunistic.
Interesting. Yeah,
Definitely.
so the project was to actually kind of rein all that in and have one line that I assume different sizes is what
Yeah.
it entailed.
Yeah. So I mean, the idea was we had anywhere, I think we had roughly about 27 different SKUs. We had a handful that were in Asia, we had a handful in Europe, a few in South America, and a bunch in the US. And they were all basically doing the same thing. So,
Hmm.
we had your, super high end um, product that would allow for more control and more customization. And then we had very basic, like, just run a piece of paper through with the film. So when we looked at that challenge, we're like, wow, like, why do we have 8 different laminators that do this and 6 that do this? Like, can we get away with 2? Like, can we get away with like what is the lowest common denominator? Which was always a struggle for me with math. But it's like we get to this like, all right, what are the core needs from the consumers? What do the consumers want? So we would start and say, all right, when you're looking to spend under $50 on a laminator, what do you want on it? It's like, well, we want it to be simple, direct, like the clearest path to the end product. We want it to be good quality. We want it to have maybe good brand recognition, but you got to hit that price, got to deliver on the quality, and it doesn't need a lot of frills or bells and whistles. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we would talk to like high end photo output folks and say, like, all right, what are you looking for? They're like, oh, we need the ability to, adjust the temperature mid process, and we need the ability to run a bunch of different films. We need the ability to do sheet fed versus roll fed, and we're like, okay, all right. So we took all that information, kind of synthesized it, brought it back to our retailers and said, hey, look, this is what we're hearing from our consumer base. This is what the user's saying. The user wants these features at this level. This is what we're proposing to do. So we proposed a new range of 8 different laminators to cover off. We had some UL and some electrical issues, not issues, but requirements we had to meet outside the states. Got everybody aligned to that, and then we started to build what our opening price point platform was going to be, and then what were the things we could do to shift and adjust that platform to bring it really close to that mid price point, but then stop there and then move to a mid price point platform. And then from that mid price point platform, we actually were able to build the mid and the high. So
Nice.
we started it, and it was good. We got a lot of economies of scale, which was really good. The industrial design was super flexible across the range, so you could tell very easily that there was a step from from opening price point to mid to high. And then we were also able to work the user experience and the UI, from a very basic kind of level, what you'd expect under $50, to what you would expect at 500. And then the cool thing for that project for me was, because we were doing all that work with the consumers up front, we did that work with the buyers and our commercial partners. I was able to continue to push through and work through the packaging and the messaging in store, talk about, like, all right, this is what the planogram set is going to look like. This is what we're going to do for, at the time, Office Depot, Office Max. This is what we're going to do for Staples. This is how we're going to be able to build out a little bit of space inside of Target, and some of the other retail partners we used at the time. So it was really nice. Like, doesn't happen often, but the ability to take that knowledge you learn on the front end, developing what users need, all the way to delivering what the consumer needs on shelf to make their decisions, and really get the right product in hand.
Yeah. Was there anything new or innovative in the product, or was it more of just an exercise of, let's bring SKU down and revamp the ID, and kind of build a new
Yeah. So
family of books?
interestingly enough, we did when we identified the different platforms, we identified some new technologies for those platforms. In the end, based on every when the project started out, we didn't think our retail partners were going to be as excited as they were about this, but they got really hot and really excited. They're like, great, like, simplify it for us. We want to reduce our inventory, maximize the turns. So we left some lamination tech on the shelf, but we did work on some things with halogens. We worked on some things with some different heat sources. We worked on some things where we did some different cooling inside, where we had heated rollers and cooling. So it was there were a lot of puts and takes that we explored. In the end, we ended up going with what we not necessarily what we could do, but what was going to be the most efficient across the platforms that hit the timing. So I always, one of the guys I worked for very early on in my career is like, look, we can make whatever you want, it just costs.
Yeah.
And the reality is, you have that triangle of time, spec, and cost. So if you
Yeah.
want to condense time, or if you want to accelerate the time, you have to pull something in from someplace else. So we were very focused on cost. We were very focused on making sure we delivered the right experience, and some of those things we just weren't able to push through.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind
Long
of goes
answer
along the same
to the
lines
question.
of what's the you can have it fast, you can have it cheap, or you can have it. I can't remember the third one, but you only get to pick two, right?
Yeah, yeah, it could be good, it could be fast, it could be cheap. You
Right.
pick. Yeah, you only
Yeah.
get to them. So,
Yeah.
which is,
So
I mean, oh, sorry. Go ahead,
no,
Troy.
no, go ahead.
It's just, it's one of those hurdles in development. And I think it's like, when you come in as like a young designer, young product developer, you're like, we're gonna drive it through and change the world. But those trade-offs become really, they become real. And
Yeah.
it's like, as a designer, as a somebody who's always been kind of the voice of the consumer, I'm always like, yeah, no, they're not going to want that. Like, we have to, and and that's the healthy the healthy tension, right? Like
Yeah.
between yourself and like the engineer or the marketer. Marketer's like, yeah, I need it out at 1999, and the engineer and the designer are looking at each other, like, yeah, okay, this is just gonna happen. Like,
Yeah.
that's great, but we just don't know how we're gonna do that. Now, if you want to do it, if you want to do these things, we can get it for 1999. But it's like, how do you address it and do that?
Sure, sure. So we've helped design literally thousands of products, and every journey is different. Can you kind of walk us through the journey of? I mean, you've talked a little bit about reducing the SKU count and all that, but can you walk us through the journey of actually developing the product from a concept standpoint all the way
Yeah.
through to shelf?
Yeah, so I mean, it was really strange because I mean, like most of these things, they're fragile when they start. It was an idea, and it was myself and I think one of the engineering directors, and we were just having a beer, and we were talking about just everybody. I think when you're inside an organization, you get a little cynical sometimes on how you do things, and we were both like, man, why do we have so many like staplers? It's like, we just need a ton of staplers. Like, why? Yeah, it's like, why do we have? And then, we kind of talked about it and we're like, oh, this is why. Kind of rationalize it. But then we were talking about laminators and it's like, both kind of looked at each other like, yeah, I don't really know why. And then we talked to our marketing partner. He's like, it's like, I don't know. Like, we're focused on this other stuff. We're not even thinking about laminators. So we were like, okay. So, between, him and I were kind of spitballing this around and like, digging through, what the regions were looking for and then pulling all the product in. So, like we just started ordering products. That's one of the nice things about being with a big organization. It's like, oh, I want to see what that Japanese laminator is, like bring it in. And you're like, this is the same as what we're selling in South America.
Right.
Like literally a different badge. So it's like, what are we doing here and why is it that way? So, like we got all that together and then, it's just kind of looking at them, evaluating them. And then, our marketing counterpart would come in as kind of like, it wasn't a war room that would be very generous. It was more like a conflict closet. Where we just had like all the product shoved in there. But we started doing some tear downs, started breaking stuff apart, and we're like, oh, well, they're doing this a little bit different here, and they're doing like, why is that? And it's like, and then we pulled in, and this was all very much like, I wouldn't say after hours, but super skunk worky. And it was like, we pulled in a sourcing guy, and then once we pulled the sourcing guy in, kind of set some bells off, and everybody's like, "What are you guys doing? Like, what's going on here?" So once that was kind of cat was out of the bag, we're like, "Hey, look, this is what we feel the opportunity is. We feel like there's an opportunity to build economies of scale. Feel like there's an opportunity to align regions." To specific, align regions to what the consumers are looking for. So what the features and benefits need to be. And then an even bigger conversation was, and we think it's time to align to brands because at the time we had like 4 different brands across this.
Okay.
So, how do we unify across all those different areas? And everybody's like, okay. And, of course, the next question was like, can we make any money? It's like, this is all great. It sounds like a fun academic project, but is there money to be made? And that's that like the last bit was bringing the sourcing guy in to say like, oh yeah, if you were to shift this from this factory here and move this to one group and have them doing this, and move this to another group, and we would definitely be able to get economies of scale. There were some other things going on in the business where they were looking to bid the appliances, some of the larger appliances. So, there was already talk of pulling products away from certain vendors. Because sometimes a vendor will do you a favor, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll make this for you because we're making these other things and we make a lot of money
Right.
here."
Right.
So sometimes it's difficult, like you'll upset the apple cart. But we were already kind of, it was a perfect storm of activities that everybody's looking to kind of see how we cost reduce and how we could, make things more efficient.
Yeah. I've got to imagine that even if, the manufacturing was more expensive or the end price was more expensive, just consolidating everything had to save a ton of money and time
Yeah,
and
yeah, it's
logistics and all the stuff.
for sure. It's interesting because like there are a lot of like unspoken costs that happen inside of big organizations and inside of product development. Like the packaging cost is never really talked about. It's just a bucket on the bill of materials. It's like packaging. That's what it is. It's like, wait a minute, gang. Like if we're really trying to be efficient here, we're really trying to save, like, why is the packaging so much more here and so much less here? It's like, oh
Mhm.
well, because the vendor that we use right now, they just outsource that packaging and it's a line item cost for them. And the other vendor actually does it internally. It's like, okay, well, is there an opportunity to build up that economy of scale by using that one person that factory goes out to, and then everybody using that group?
Right.
So, there was some that happened that way. There's also some inventory costs that are just aren't really talked about. There's ability to, if you overbuy in one market, can you shift that to another market? So that, there's, shift that inventory over there and resell it. So there's a lot of those things that just go unarticulated because you're in a hurry and you're rushing. But we had enough examples of where that had happened in the past where we could say, hey, like, this thing cost us, $200,000 because we weren't able to meet this opportunity. Like if we had inventory, we could move, we could be more opportunistic that way, and we could flex, especially globally, which was a big goal of the business at the time, was to focus more outside of just North America and Europe, but really kind of build a foothold inside of Asia, build more of a foothold in Brazil, South America, and those places. So.
Interesting. Um, excuse me.
And
What was the timeline like to get like every,
so originally we were going to operate on like a 24 to 30 month kind of time plan. We ended up doing it in 18
oh wow.
because the cat was out of the bag, right? Like we were really trying to like get all our ducks in a row and make sure. So we would have, ideally we would have spent about 6 months in that upfront skunk worky kind of phase, like figuring things out. It's really what I do now called the advanced development phase.
Hmm.
um so it's like, all right, we're working through the AD, like we're evaluating, like, all right, these are different platforms we could build, different technologies we could use. How do we vet those? How do we make sure those are going to work? But we basically kind of pulled the trigger, and then it was all hands on deck, and a lot of trips to Asia, a lot of late nights. Like we had a lot of this manufacturing was going on in Portugal at one point. So going to the factory and really digging in with them and understanding. And actually, that factory was one of the ones that was doing all holistically. So all their packaging, everything else. And we're like, why is this so much more here? And so it just it was quick. Like the product development piece of that, building the internal engines, building the different platforms, building the UIs, I would say was the level of complexity was really high, but the sourcing, supply chain, customer relationship piece was equally as complex. So it's just this, like this really hairy kind of a project that was it was fun to do, and we had a good time, but it just was super condensed.
Yeah. Was it one of those things once the upper management learned what was going on, they're like, yeah, we want this and we want it now? Or was it you had to go fast because of all the other things you were working on with vendors or?
Combination. I think they wanted it and they wanted it now. And then once you get the commercial team on board, and they and they're pumped up about it, they can get it in. They're like,
Yeah.
hey, like Staples wants this, and they want this right away. Like WB Mason, like they're looking for this. Like some of the other big catalog players, which is where most of Office Products is done, is through that catalog channel. But it really becomes a pull from those guys, and it's sales guys don't like to tell anybody no, and
Yeah.
they can only hear no so much from the engineers before they're like, hey, we need some help here moving this. And it's not only engineers, but it's development, it's marketing. It's like, yeah,
Sure.
guys, we realize that, but we have to develop it. We have to make sure that when we're running the process, that the consumers are they're happy with the user experience. Like they're happy with the tension in loading. They're happy with the resistance in the buttons. Those things take time.
Yeah.
So it was just a lot of camping out in factories and with the development team to make sure we could get it out the door.
Yeah. You mentioned yourself, and I think you said engineering manager, and then marketing person, and then eventually the sourcing person.
Uh,
Um, Other than that, like how many people were involved in developing the product from an industrial design standpoint, and then actually engineering and all that?
Yeah, I think so. We did the industrial design internally, so we had a team, industrial design, UI, UX. So we had a team
Mhm.
of like 5 folks. So
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't hardcore 100% of the time, but it was a few months where everybody was pulling in the same direction because it was such a big program. I think there were like we ended up with 9 units, 9 to 11 units. So with that range, like everybody had like, all right, you're going to work on opening price point, you're going to work on mid, you guys are going to work on the mid and HP, high end stuff together. Let's work on the UI across
sending files over to the vendors and it's always changing. Like I was going to reply with, I've never designed a product, even a part, that the vendor hasn't said, yeah, we at least want to change this, right? There's always something that changes.
I don't know what that is. Like, and it could be the simplest part, right? Like, I've
Yeah.
done that with sheet metal. Like when I was doing production engineering, like instead of doing cast parts, we did some stamped up. So it's like we're just laminating and instead of casting. And I did that. The guy's like, oh no, I just and instead of doing round holes, let's do square holes. Let's do notches because
Yeah.
it'll just key in better. And it's like, okay, I get it. I mean, I think there's like this quest for always doing better, but at some point, like it's got to be reductive the amount of duplication that takes part, or
Oh
maybe
yeah.
it's a good way to learn it. Like I don't know, by copying the parts and redesigning them yourself, maybe you get a better intention of what the design
Yeah.
is. I don't know. It's
I'm
just
not
weird.
sure. Yeah. We, we just finished a design for an inventor and it's super complex, probably, I don't know, 65 parts. And we got it to a point where I know it functions the way he wants it to function, but it's
Yeah.
not done. And
Okay.
I said, there's no reason for us to keep designing this right now because we need to send it to the vendor because they're going to tear it to shreds and we need to incorporate all that. We can work on some of the things we want to work on when we do that. So,
Well, that's an interesting thing too, because like if you're doing it at 65 parts, like when a vendor gets it, they're like I don't know, they're like wake up and get out of bed kind of moment is like, how do I make this into 6 parts?
right. Exactly.
How do I
Exactly.
reduce complexity here? Because the
Yeah.
last thing I want is to have like 30, 40 different parts that have to be individually made and crafted together.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which is one of the interesting things with the laminators. Like there were a ton of parts in those machines, and one of the things when we did all the teardowns is like, okay, what is the basics that we need here, and then how
Yeah.
do we set them up? Because it is like that sort of a thing where somebody just said, hey, this is a laminator we want to do, and somebody kind of created a design and turned it over. But doing that platform kind of based that was really more like, hey, like let's tighten it down and really get to like the key amount of subsystems and the platforms. Like we had a heating platform, we had a rolling platform, we had our electric platform, we had our UI platform. So it was all just swappable. I mean,
Hmm.
at least that was the dream.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and we got pretty close.
Cool. With all the product impulses help design, there's always some kind of challenge that comes up. What was the biggest challenge with developing this line of
Um, Biggest challenge I think for us, we had a shift in, well, let me think. We had a shift in leadership in the middle. So I think that was a good thing. I think that pushed everybody in the right direction. Um, I think the challenge here was just how do we make sure that like we were ruthlessly trying to simplify at every step. And I think everybody always takes simplicity for granted. And it's like, oh, well, that's easy. Of course you do it that way. Like, a lot of folks, and even the folks that I worked with, some of the folks I worked with, especially in leadership on this project, they didn't have product development chops or background. And they just were like, well, make it simpler. Like, reduce the complexity. It's like, okay, but the elegant part of simplicity is the complexity it takes to get there.
Mhm.
So how do you really communicate that, and in a condensed timeline. And like I remember we did a grid for selling the product of like, okay, here are all the features, here are the models, and like let's just lay it out. And when we would lay it out, they wouldn't pyramid. And like our SVP was like, it's got to be a pyramid. It's got to be the cheapest one's got to have the least amount, and the most expensive has to have the biggest amount. And that's just how people read it. He's like, TurboTax. It's got to be like TurboTax. Like, think of how TurboTax does it. And yeah, to this day, I don't like looking at the TurboTax. But it was a great exercise because it really forced a lot of critical thinking. And it's like, well, if we're saying this feature needs to be on a lower level unit, why? Why is that the case? And is it a user requirement? And if it is a user requirement, okay, how do we quantify that? No, it's not just like that fringe user, but the actual core user. And then how do we build it up that way? So I'd say, that was really like establishing the feature sets, establishing, how we transition from opening price point to middle price point to high price point. Those were the things that were really difficult to justify. I think because we had done so much platforming work, we knew how to do it all. We knew
Mm-hmm.
how to move from like a mil thickness that was like 3 mil to something that was 10 or 12. Like, we knew like what the subsystems were that we're going to have to do that. We knew the types of materials that it was going to take, and we actually had such a wide library, we could do it a lot of different ways. So based on the nice thing about breaking this down was almost like from a high price point unit standpoint of view, we had a bunch of different ways that was being executed. So like the roller mechanism was being executed, like, I think out of the 30 units we had, I think 7 of them were those high price point units, and out of the 7, there were 4 different ways it was pulling the laminate.
Mm-hmm.
So it was great. So it's like, hey, we've got these different things. So technically, I wouldn't say there were a ton of technical challenges. I think the challenges were, how do we make decisions on what is the right way to do this moving forward that's going to address what the consumer needs, what they're looking for from an experience standpoint, while we deliver what we need from a business standpoint.
Yeah, yeah. Very
That was,
interesting.
yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit as we start to wrap up, what are some of the trends like that you see emerging in product development?
Um, I think everybody's talking about AI.
Yeah.
So I think AI is great. There's some really good image generation stuff. I think AI is the new smart. I just got back from what was it? The beginning of June. I was in Seattle for the Smart Kitchen Summit. We were talking about AI in food, but then AI just in general, and how the term is really being misused. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think our phones have had AI almost since the beginning with just autocorrect and spelling.
Sure.
So how that happens, I think that's becoming more and more interesting. I think what I like seeing from a trend standpoint is more more high end manufacturing jobs coming back to the States. More of the semiconductor work coming back here. More of those things happening. Um, Not necessarily evening out the trade imbalance, but bringing some of that know-how and that ability back to the United States, because I think for the last 50 years we've been offshoring that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. More collaboration in teams. So and more diverse teams. Like, our UI person's in all our stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
she's plugged in from beginning to end. Can you hear those dogs, or is it just me?
I can hear the dog now. Yeah.
Damn it.
It's all right.
Yeah, it's all right. She's got to let everybody know she's this big. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, like, just having more cross functionality. I see less, and maybe it's just the organization that I'm in. But when I started out, probably when you started out, there were a lot of heroes. There were a lot of folks that are like, get on my back and I'll take you up the mountain, where I just don't see that as much now. I see more people comfortable being like, yeah, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. Like, let's figure it out together. I think there are still leaders in the organization, but they lead differently.
Mm-hmm.
It feels more, there's more appreciation for the work that's done. There's more appreciation of the work-life balance now.
Sure.
Um, and I also feel like there's a drive towards, depending on where you're working and what industry you're working on, there's a drive towards quality, over, it's quality and, reduction of complexity.
Sure.
So for the user. So I mean, yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
That kind
No.
of answer.
Yeah, that's good. You've been doing this for a while, so reflecting on all the challenges and the successes that you've had developing products, what kind of words of wisdom would you share with somebody looking to make a significant impact in the product development industry?
Um, I would say, get into it because you love it. Get into it because you love solving problems. I think, having a passion for, at least for me, for helping people and solving consumer challenges really helps. Having a appreciation for craft and like the ability to craft things and know what good looks like, I think is really important. But I think it's just, have the energy and passion for it. I think passion will get you a lot further than skill. You can always pick the skills up as you go, but if you love what you're doing, if you love solving those problems and making things, there's always a seat for you at the table.
Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. Totally agree. So awesome. This has been great. Before we go, is there anything else you want to mention with regards to product development or the the laminators?
No, I mean, I think I appreciate the opportunity to talk about them. I have not told the laminator story in a long time. Typically, when I tell this story, my kids kind of just gloss over. It's like, don't.
To learn more about Impulse and how we might be able to help you, visit impulseproductdevelopment.com.